Funding for the Maddy Report is made possible by grants from the California Emerging Technology Fund, leaders in the quest for digital equity. The James Irvine Foundation, committed to a California where all low-income workers have the power to advance economically. Fresno State Associated Students, Inc., students serving students. BNSF Railway, moving our economy for 160 years. And The Wonderful Company. The Maddy Report is also made possible thanks to contributions from Harris Ranch Inn and Restaurant and E&J Gallo Winery. From the Maddy Institute, the Public Policy Institute for the Valley's 4 public universities, this is the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Keppler.
Welcome. You know, the Valley has long suffered from chronic unemployment. Indeed, the Valley has some of the worst unemployment in the nation. That's in spite of the fact that there are jobs here. There are some plentiful jobs, actually. The problem is, are there enough people that are skilled to do those jobs? And that often training is a big impediment, a barrier to employment. Our guest today is Shannon McConville. She's actually an expert in this area. She's a research analyst with the Non-Partisan Public Policy Institute, and she's written an interesting article on a report entitled Improving Career Education Pathways into California's Workforce, which is very relevant for here in the Valley. Welcome to the Maddy Report.
Thanks, Mark. It's nice
to see you again. Hey, so I want to ask you, you suggest in your report that California's approach to career education pathways needs to be reevaluated. Why do you say that?
Well, you know, ideally we want career education programs, especially those that are provided by our public institutions like the California community colleges, to align with in-demand jobs so that they can get jobs and employment when they've completed those. And you know, we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, which really did change some of the labor market and employment patterns. And so, you know, in some ways, the pandemic kind of fast forwarded some of the trends we were seeing, whether that was being more online or other things.
Online for sure. I mean, that is a change that we're not going back.
No, we're not. And you see it in healthcare and various industries, retail. And so, you know, and that was a trend that was happening in the labor market. But I think a lot of folks and analysts think that the pandemic has really fast forwarded some of those trends. And so that all means that our career education needs to be responsive to that, to try to understand what the skills for the jobs kind of in the next, both in the near term and the long term, right? What those jobs look like and how they can train workers.
There's some basic terms here, which for you, I'm sure, are very simple. But for all of us, can you educate us? What is the difference between workforce education and job training?
We use those largely interchangeably. I mean, it's also sometimes called vocational training. Here, we're really talking about post-secondary institutions providing skills and training for different types of jobs. And typically those are related to the industry sectors where those jobs may be. But this is where you're really getting kind of targeted training for a particular, say, industry or type of field to go into.
Now, I'm just wondering, you know, the state's been doing a lot of investing in workforce training, but isn't this kind of a private sector thing? Shouldn't employers be the ones doing the training?
No, that's true. And I mean, employers do provide training. I think, you know, there's always on the job training, right? I think, you know, in some ways, jobs have changed over the last several decades. We don't have as long a job tenure at certain institutions or certain employers. So employers maybe are counting on other public institutions to provide some of that job training for their workforce.
So let's talk about some of the challenges and difficulties in, you know, for colleges delivering these pathways for career education. What do you see as some of the impediments?
Yeah, so we did do some interviews in this project where we were talking to both community college practitioners as well as employers and workforce development intermediaries who try to connect people who are looking for training and jobs with providers of that training. What we learned is it's really difficult for the community colleges to both develop and kind of sustain relationships with employers and industry groups. And that's really this crucial link to knowing what skills employers want, where the skills that are going to be demanded in the labor market are going. So that means that they have to adjust curricula or understand kind of what the opportunities are going to be. And so that was what we really heard most. And we heard it from both community college practitioners as well as employers, that it was just difficult to forge these bonds and kind of maintain them over time. And that's really where at least some of the funding that's been dedicated both at the federal and state level, we're kind of aiming to provide, additional resources so that colleges, particularly community colleges, can make those connections with employers to understand what's happening in the labor market and what skills these employers need so that they can translate those into their programs.
It seems pretty obvious, but there has been this sometimes this disconnect, the town gown disconnect between universities, community colleges, and the workforce. And usually it's dependent on like one faculty member reaching out, not necessarily a coordinated effort. That's kind of problematic. I just want to touch real quickly on the amount of funds invested by the federal and state government. How much are we talking about?
Quite a bit, actually. So the Legislative Analyst's Office, and this is pre-pandemic, they estimated that the state deploys about $7 billion annually to support different types of career education. Some amount of this does come from the federal government through programs like the Workforce Investment and Opportunity Act. Quite a bit of it is from state general fund, and a lot of that is really focused on the community colleges.
Yeah, there's a lot of money out here. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about the role of community colleges in workforce training. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. They say the best poverty program is a job. First, however, you have to have the skills to do the job. Our guest is Shannon McConville. She's a research fellow with the Non-Partisan Public Policy Institute of California. She recently issued a report on improving California's career pathways, in which she noted that, quote, the California community college system is the largest provider of publicly funded career training education in the state. Community colleges are therefore critical for effective and equitable workforce training, unquote. So what types of workforce training programs are available for students at community colleges?
Right. There's really a wide range of programs. In this study, we looked at the 6 largest career education programs that are offered throughout the community college system. So we have, over 100 community colleges. They're located in all regions of the state, and they do provide low-cost training. So we looked at, again, 6 the largest career education programs. Those include programs in business, information technology, health, family and consumer sciences, which is largely early childhood education programs, manufacturing and engineering, and public and protective services is the last one.
Yeah, those all seem to make a lot of sense. So what is the demographic makeup? I'm wondering, in terms of the students enrolled in these career education programs, who are these people?
Right. So like the community colleges, more broadly speaking, they really do more reflect the demographics of the state. Nearly 40% of students in career education are Latino, about 35% are white, 14% are Asian, and Black students make up about 7%. So they really do look much more like California's overall population relative to some of our other public higher education institutions.
And men and women are pretty evenly divided as well?
They are. It's about half and half, although the men and women really split in different areas. So for example, in the manufacturing and engineering fields, I think 80 or 90% of students are males. Likewise, when we're in family and consumer sciences, which is where early childhood education lives, it's flipped. It's about 80 or 90% are women. Yeah. But overall, it's quite similar.
And I think your point is well taken. There's a difference between who's attending these community colleges and who attends the CSU or the UCs. The community colleges are much more like the general population. UCs and CSUs not quite as much. But that's an interesting point. I assume that most potential students do some sort of kind of cost-benefit analysis before they decide to get training. In other words, is the time they spent and money they spend getting the training worth the wages they're going to get in the long run? So what are some of the opportunity costs for students in career education, and how can they be mitigated?
Yeah, no, it's a very good point, and one that I really think we need to stay focused on. So in the community college system and in the students that we were looking at, they are often balancing other responsibilities. So many of them are working. We do see quite a bit of part-time enrollment in career education studies. And so this is, to be a student does take time away from other things like being in the labor force. And so to the extent that community college students tend to come from lower income backgrounds, they may also be working while they're in school. And so that really does underscore kind of the need for them to be able to move through the program, to know what courses they need to have those courses offered so that they complete whatever types of training, to complete why they're there and why they're attending.
A lot of times you hear, like in higher education, there's not a good connection between, what you're teaching and what they actually do on the job. What about at community college level in these career education pathways? Is it really connected? Is it really job relevant?
I mean, that's ideally the hope, and I think in several of the fields it is. This is a lot of practical, hands-on training, right? So whether you're in a healthcare field, there are clinical components, there are actual things that are happening, or for example, say a lot of the engineering or manufacturing jobs. These again, whether it's welding or certain electrical, skills, but these are things that really do require a certain, very, very targeted to a certain type of position or job.
Would also the jobs vary depending on region? I mean, there are some jobs that are relevant to Central California that wouldn't be relevant to the coast, and vice versa.
That's true. We talked to one like manufacturing or advanced engineering employer, and they were actually in the Inland Empire. But I think there are other places in the Valley, but they have a larger manufacturing presence. Or you have programs that are, say, in logistics, and those are going to exist in places that have more space and have more warehousing. I've mentioned healthcare a few times, but that's one of the, one of the fields where there really are opportunities kind of throughout the state.
Yeah, there's no question. There's healthcare professionals needed everywhere. Well, up next, we're going to talk about good paying jobs. Do you need a college education? Sometimes maybe the answer really is no. Maybe a credential will work. So we're going to talk about credentialing programs and how they can help some people move along the career pathway. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. Nearly 1 million students have pursued career education at California's community colleges over the last decade. Many times, it's not necessarily to pursue a degree, but rather to get a credential that signifies a certain experience, knowledge, and competence in a given field. Are these programs delivering on that promise? Our guest is Shannon McConville. She's with the Non-Partisan Public Policy Institute of California, and she studied career education pathways and has done a recent report on that. So I want to ask you, what information do we need to make sure that community colleges are more effectively and efficiently delivering career education programs?
Yeah. One of the first things I think we really need to understand is what students are hoping to get from their time at the community colleges. So it is the case that the community college system has started collecting information, and this is several years on what the students' goals are. And so community colleges are open access institutions. They take essentially all students, and so it's important to know is the student entering a program and really wanting to get a very specific career education credential? How can we get them through the fastest? Versus a lot of students are looking to transfer to a four-year college. And so really helping students understand what they need to do and what courses they need to take to meet their goals as quickly as possible, I think is one of the key pieces of information.
And that's a unique mix at the community college level, because if you're going to college, you're typically a four-year college, you're looking for a four-year degree, but a community college may not. You may be looking for a credential and not necessarily a degree. So what is the PPIC tracking when they're looking at effectiveness of career education programs?
Yeah, well, because sometimes we don't really know what students want, we looked at kind of 4 different milestones along a pathway to understand what students maybe, what field we thought they were intending in. And so essentially we have to look at their coursework to kind of decide, yes, it looks like you maybe wanted to get a health credential, and then we can track and see whether in fact they did get a health credential, right? And so we looked at what programs they were in, whether they completed an initial credential in that program. We also wanted to look at stackable credentials. And so that's if you maybe completed a short-term credential in one field, did you return to the community colleges? And did you, say, complete a second credential that maybe was a higher level or could advance you along in the career that you were, or in the workplace that you were entering as a result of the credential?
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Did you find when you examined students who finished that first credential that they returned for a second credential?
We did. We found almost half of students, I think, especially students who initially complete a short-term credential. So in the community colleges, the highest level credential that you can earn is an associate degree without moving on and transferring. But they do offer a lot of different types of credentials, and some are what we call short-term credentials. They can require as few as 6 units to complete and as many as, I think, 29 units. And so for those students who completed the short-term credentials, we did see higher shares that would return after they finished the credential to complete additional coursework.
But you were looking at different credentials, healthcare, business, IT. Did you see a difference in the discipline in terms of finishing that credential?
We did. So we do see pretty large differences in finishing, say, the first credential. Students in health programs have much higher completion rates. Almost, or about half of students who we define as entering or intending to complete a health credential eventually do. This compares to much lower rates in, say, something like business or IT. Fewer than 20% of students who take a lot of courses in those fields eventually earn a credential in that field.
And my understanding from your report is licensing has a lot to do with this. In the healthcare professions, licensing is kind of important. And so students want to finish those credentials in healthcare.
That's right. It's also true that some of the health programs, registered nursing being kind of the key one, they do have some entrance requirements. So in a way, that also kind of changes maybe who the students are that enter these programs, but they do have to meet certain requirements to get into the program. And that's not true for nearly all other community college or career education programs. So that likely impacts it as well.
And the stackable credential pathways, that's something. Can you first of all define what a stackable credential pathway is? And I guess my understanding is it's basically taking it in smaller units. Instead of doing it 30 units or whatever, you're going to break it down into 3 10-unit stackable credentials. How successful are those? Do people pursue those? Is it making these smaller bite sizes better or not?
Yeah. And, honestly, that was one of the main reasons why we did this study. We hear a lot about stackable credentials, and we wanted to see kind of in practice how often students are doing them. Overall, we don't find that many students are actually completing a stackable pathway. And we define a stackable career pathway where you earn an initial credential, usually a short-term or long-term credential in a particular field. Then you return after you've completed that credential, you earn additional courses or you earn additional units, take more courses in that area, and then you complete a second credential. Overall, we find fewer than 10% of students ever manage to make it through a stackable credential. And there are slight differences across fields, but they're not very large.
That was a little surprising to me in your report. I would think that you break it down into smaller chunks that it might be more doable. Let me ask you this. If you compare students getting credentials versus associate's degrees, how much time does it take? I mean, is it pretty similar or?
Right. I mean, and that's one of the things with stackable pathways. You want, if an associate degree is what's going to give you the highest, say, wage return or the highest, economic mobility, if you break it into chunks and students earn a credential and then they go and work for a while and then they have to return, that might take them off the path to the associate degree, right? Or a bachelor's degree or to transfer. And so we want to be very clear. The pathways really need to be well defined. You need to know if I finish this, I can come back and this is the next step, those sorts of things. And some of that clarity isn't really there in terms of how it's defined and telegraphed to students. So I think that's one of the big issues.
Okay, well, when we come back, we're going to talk a little bit more about how to improve California's career pathways. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Keppler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Shannon McConville, a research fellow with the Non-Partisan Public Policy Institute of California, about a recent report she wrote about career education in California's community colleges. Some of the basic findings were, 1, overall, few career education students earn a credential. 2, those that do, it takes about 3 years to complete their credentials. Number 4, numerous institutions and actors shape student success. And it's important, number 4, that success involves all the stakeholders being involved in the process. And I wanted to ask you about the profile of students who are successfully completing that first credential. Are there differences based on demographics?
There are. And so we looked at things across gender, age, and race ethnicity. We find that female students are more likely to complete credentials, career education credentials. We also find older students are more likely, as are Asian and white students. Career education students tend to complete at higher rates than Latino or Black students do. And the other thing I'd add there is that the differences across certain groups really emerge pretty early in the trajectories of these students. So within the first 1 to 2 terms of enrollment, the path or the trajectories to success for some students kind of start veering off from other.
Right.
Students.
And one of the things I think I got from your report was being a full-time student makes a big difference too in terms of success.
Honestly, that is the biggest difference, and it far outweighs any of the demographic profile. So if a student is able to attend even 1 term full-time, that really makes so much of a difference. And if that term can be early on in their program, it really does make a huge difference. Again, that dwarfs the other the disparities or differences that we see across these different demographic groups.
So that kind of begs the question, what kind of resources do we need to make these programs more successful?
Yeah, and so, I mean, the biggest thing would be how can we help students to attend full time, to be able to afford to really focus on just their studies, get through the program quickly so that it doesn't take, say, 3 years to earn a short-term credential, but instead it takes 6 months to earn a short-term credential and attending full time and really be able to focus on their studies. So that's things like, is there financial aid available? Or wage replacement. We heard about that from some employers who actually pay their current employees who are trying to advance in their jobs. They will pay them their regular rate even when they're in school getting that additional training.
It's also flexible schedules too. If people are working, they can't have a traditional semester, quarter system. It has to be something that meets their needs.
We did hear that quite a bit too from our interviews, especially amongst, say, employers and workforce development partners, that, the community colleges, while low cost and, they are more flexible now, especially post-pandemic, maybe more online courses,
Right.
courses in the evenings. At the same time, they still are on a semester system. And that's not always when, say, a person is trying to get training for a job, or say the timeline that employers need to find their workers, right? And so that was one of the big difficulties with working with the community colleges.
Having been with a university for 35 years, I can appreciate how difficult it is to turn an academic institution. It's like trying to turn a battleship sometimes. But there's this connection between the community colleges and employers. Both have advantages, benefits to both. How can they strengthen that relationship?
Yeah, so we have, I think I mentioned earlier when we were talking about funding, there is additional monies that are coming from the State General Fund for the Strong Workforce Program. And those are these regional collaboratives that are really intending to help, again, at a regional level. That's where our labor markets are organized, but to help community college programs really connect with the employers in their region, to develop programs and really building those relationships. And you mentioned earlier, a lot of times it's one faculty member. Right. Well, if that faculty member leaves or something, then that relationship ends. And so we also heard that, the employer engagement needs to be kind of a college-wide, endeavor with some of the leaders of the college to really solidify those relationships so that they can keep developing their programs and keep making sure they have those connections to the labor market.
We've only got about 30 seconds left, but I did want to ask you, what did you conclude were the priorities community colleges should focus on moving forward when it comes to career education and workforce training?
Well, we're exiting the pandemic right now. The community colleges have much lower enrollment. They're still, working to get back some of the enrollment. And so I do think trying to find ways to offer good training programs that students can get through and then get connected to the labor market, and really be able to telegraph that information to students. If you want to do this, come and enroll in this. It will take you this amount of time, and then you'll be able to have, a job in this field. And so I think that they really need to be targeted and really try to help people connect to the kinds of training that they want.
There's no question. We've heard it before. Learning is a lifelong process, and community colleges play an important role in that. I want to thank Shannon McConville with the PPIC for joining us. If you want to stay current with local events, you can log on to our website and check out the Maddy Daily, a free e-newsletter that we offer. This is Mark Keppler for the Maddy Institute. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about today's episode of the Maddy Report, please visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.